Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode titled Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week we will be talking about Parnell, widely considered to be Clark Gable's worst film, including by Gable himself. Every year, November is Politics Month, and we conclude Politics Month by featuring a real turkey of a movie in the episode that we released right before Thanksgiving. This qualifies. We are also excited to welcome a special guest, Finn Dwyer of the Irish History Podcast, who will be joining us later to tell us about Irish nationalist politician Charles Stewart Parnell, who I doubt deserved this movie. And also, we had to learn about him somewhere, and it certainly wasn't going to be this film. I can't overstate how badly I need this month to end, because we have watched a couple of just nightmarish snoozers.
That's why Finn will be joining us to talk about Parnell, but you should not watch this movie. It's terrible.
No, I cannot in good conscience tell anyone to ever watch this movie. However, I'm doing some painting in the apartment, and that I can recommend over this film, watching that dry.
So last year, the Thanksgiving movie was 1942's Tennessee Johnson, a film that made you incandescent with rage. And to our listeners, I highly recommend that you all go listen to episode 31, Tennessee Johnson, because it always makes me giggle when Sarah gets mad at a bad movie. And it made me a little sad when I realized that this might be the only time when we would get to talk about Clark Gable. But then I remembered that we have the Charles Lawton Mutiny on the Bounty coming up at some point. Tennessee Johnson was infuriating, and this was just so boring.
And also, to be fair, I was in an aggressively bad place at the time. We had just had our elections. And so I was at a 9 all the time. And that movie pushed me over the edge. Anyway, Rena, do you have a trigger warning for us this week?
I do. This movie contains depictions of and or references to starvation, 19th century male facial hair choices except on the lead, 19th century Ireland, Old Hollywood, premature death, adultery, famine, non-existent beards, the Hays Code, the House of Commons, ethnic stereotypes, and excruciating boredom.
Rena, can you give us a spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Sources we used for this episode include Clark Gable, Tormented Star by David Brett, The Irish Assassins, Conspiracy, Revenge, and the Phoenix Park Murders That Stunned Victorian England by Julie Kavanaugh, Myrna Loy, The Only Good Girl in Hollywood by Emily Wartis Leiter, Fireball, Carol Lombard, and the Mystery of Flight 3 by Robert Mattson, and The 50 Worst Films of All Time and How They Got That Way by Harry Medved. And we also have as an infallible resource the Irish History Podcast host, Finn Dwyer, as we mentioned up top.
I was not going to be able to piece enough together to do the man justice after given what this film does to him. We were very, very lucky to get him on short notice. And quite naturally, I was not going to subject him to this movie. I would not subject anyone to this movie.
I have a pretty expansive low taste palette. Also, I do love a cinematic train wreck. I find it really interesting. So this has none of that appeal to it.
MGM guaranteed a certain minimum of production quality and gloss on a thing. They're just coming off the Irving Thalberg era here. So
and it's interesting because I found counter indicative insights around whether or not Clark Gable wanted to be a part of this movie. I cannot believe that he did at the end of the day, just based on his performance and the energy he brings to it. I love also like a performance that really goes for it. And it's unusual in this day and age to see a performance that is this dead-eyed and uncommitted. No one even seems like they're trying.
So the only scene where I found where Gable is charming, there's a scene where he's playing with a cat and he's charming, but he's just being Clark Gable in that. And like stars back then, it wasn't about melting into character or being a chameleon or being unrecognizable. They wanted you to be recognizable as like the brand that they'd put forward. And maybe you emoted more or better from role to role. What we expect today that comes into play very much in the biopic, the idea that they're just supposed to disappear into the character. It doesn't exist then in the way that it does now, with exceptions, of course, for Charles Laughton.
But even with that, like, the lack of commitment to being in this film that you feel in every scene is really unique. Like, I think this movie is so bad that I struggled to imagine a world where this story could be interesting. Rena, do you want to tell us a little bit about this movie?
So I looked into 3 different books about how the various people wound up making this movie. And from Clark Gable, Tormented Star by David Brett, Clark Gable wanted Joan Crawford to appear opposite him in part. This is not, when you see what they do with Catherine O'Shea, that is not a Joan Crawford role.
No, it definitely isn't. And I feel like the only way this movie could have gotten more train wrecky is if she took this role.
The real Parnell had been described by contemporary sources as frail, shy, sensitive, and dull, portrayed by Clark, only the later adjective applied. There was a display of the now regular Gable histrionics during shooting. This time not because director John Stahl wanted him to weep, but because he wanted Clark to don a false beard and at least slightly resemble the real Parnell. He refused, declaring whiskers were dirty, although he had insisted on wearing designer stubble for Call of the Wild. Stahl got him to compromise by wearing fake sideburns, which made him look rather fetching, but did nothing to prevent the film bombing at the box office.
Yeah, sideburns weren't going to save this film, nor would a full beard.
And Myrna Loy comes on so they get Myrna Loy to play Catherine O'Shea, who was never called Kitty by anyone she was friends with. That was a slanderous term. She would have been Katie or Catherine to people. So from the Myrna Loy biography that we mentioned in the sources, the movie pretends that Katie O'Shea and Parnell never had to sneak around and never got married after the divorce. It portrays both Katie O'Shea and Parnell as romantic, sentimental softies. It also leaves out their 3 illegitimate children, one of whom came over from England as an advisor for Parnell. I think the real story is, of course, more interesting, and this is another example of how the Hays Code made it so that you couldn't tell real stories about the way real people lived.
Yeah.
People have always been having sex out of wedlock.
Even on the Oregon Trail, even in the Donner Party.
So, yeah, Gable blamed Crawford for the box office disaster that Parnell became, and he didn't talk to her for years. And the Gable fans who rejected his Parnell wanted to see the devil-may-care actor they knew and loved. They didn't recognize this somber, earnest, at times maudlin figure turned out in dark Victorian frock coats and mutton chop sideburns but no beard, who asks Katie on the day they meet, "Have you never felt there might be someone somewhere who, if you could meet them, was the person you'd always been meant to meet?"
This movie is such hot trash.
Finally, Carol Lombard ragged on Gable. One rare place where Parnell was a success was in China, so it notes here about Lombard in Fireball. She huddled up with publicity whiz Russell Birdie, and developed a leaflet announcing, "Parnell, 50 million Chinamen can't be wrong." It was a beautiful gag in theory, so good that Gable actually laughed when he heard, but it proved a dud in execution. No pilot would fly low over the studio and lose his license, so she hired boys to stand in front of the MGM gates and distribute the leaflets one at a time. But a Culver City ordinance rendered the distribution of handbills illegal as well, so the boys were paid and sent home, and the leaflets never did circulate.
Russell Birdwell, you may remember from our episode on the Alamo.
Oh, yes. Another terrible movie. Just, I guess I'd noted as an intro to this that Parnell is to this day notorious as Clark Gable's worst movie, and it was a huge flop nearly everywhere except, oddly enough, China. And today it's a footnote in his career as a factor in his reluctance to make Gone with the Wind, in that the experience left him with the impression that period films were a bad fit for him. And Lee Strasberg has a small uncredited role, which I knew would be of interest to you, Sarah. I figured that playing Spot Lee Strasberg might help you to better endure this torture.
It did, but it was also really frustrating because we couldn't find him.
I know.
And he's out there somewhere in this movie, and I'm not going to ever try to find him in it. So I found some pull quotes from the book, 50 Worst Movies Ever Made and How They Got That Way. So they had some reviews. I'm going to read them to you. Disastrous, probably the worst biopic ever made by David Shipman, author of The Great Movie Stars, The Golden Years. A singularly pallid, tedious, and unconvincing drama, Mr. Gable's speeches ring with insincerity. His half smile, which frequently develops into a full smirk, gives the lie to every other sentence he utters. That is from Frank Nugent of the New York Times. And I'm guessing that Bosley Crowther would have loved this movie, given his track record.
I don't think that's fair to Bosley Crowther.
I do. I love that Bosley Crowther has become a character on this podcast.
As well he should be.
Yes.
He had a long career and an effect on film.
Long career of having terrible opinions about movies.
I feel like it's just toward the end that he's out of touch.
I haven't looked into the full history, which is the story of my life. Not even mutton chop whiskers and a turret top collar can make Clark Gable look, sound, or act like the uncrowned king of Ireland. That is from Time magazine. He looks like a steel union worker gone Park Avenue and walks through his part with the heavy tread of the golem. That is from Rob Wagner of Script. What I found about how this happened, so basically, like, Gable was considered the uncrowned king of Hollywood in 1936. So who better to play the uncrowned king of Ireland than him? And Myrna Loy was also very, very popular. So they were like, why not have these two stars make this movie? Parnell is our second movie this month to really show that it was based on a Broadway play, written by a woman named Elsie T. Schlafler. The play ran for 99 performances in 1935 and then was revived in 1936 for 32 performances, which I just chalk up to different times. I don't understand the revival within months of the original show.
Maybe it lost its booking.
Yeah.
And then found one, and there was still demand.
Well, and also playwright Elsie Schlafler has 2 credits on the Internet Broadway database, and they are the original run of Parnell and its revival because she tragically died before the show opened.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she came to New York to prep for the opening of the show from Kansas City. And I think that's just a good reminder. Don't come to New York because you will die. The budget of this film was $1.5 million, and the movie earned $992,000. So this was very much a flop. And the director is John Stahl, who directed Magnificent Obsession and the original Imitation of Life. They had 1,500 extras on the set, which is probably why we had a hard time spotting Lee Strasberg. And it was shot on location in California to look like Ireland.
Okay, but that's the MGM backlot.
Yeah.
And that's the MGM effect. And that's why, like, the production value keeps this from being a magnificent disaster. but also can't save it.
They bought, according to the Medved book, and I can't read sarcasm well, so I'm not sure if this is true or not, but they said a ton of fake hair to make everyone's beards and sideburns.
Except Gable's.
Yes. Clark Gable was very unhappy working on this film, and it really shows. It's really strange to see a mainstream movie with a performance this uncommitted anymore. And I am not counting Randall Emmett films in this, because if you want to see uncommitted performances, pick up one of those.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, thinking about say when Zodiac came out, all you see is Jake Gyllenhaal visibly rolling his eyes while he's saying his lines. That's the vibe we're going for here. Some of the taglines they used to promote this film included "as though torn from life's pages," and "it teems with reality. That's why it is so powerful."
What were your counterparts at MGM Publicity thinking, do you think? It's a job?
I mean, I think that they saw this and they were like, we have to make the best of it. It does teem with a reality of dullness. The ancient equivalent of tweeting took place. The studio was deluged with hostile letters. It's like to the degree that a couple of years ago when Sonic the Hedgehog was supposed to come out and people were so upset by his initial appearance that they got the movie delayed to make him look less scary. Yeah. And then, Rena, can you tell us a little bit about Charles Stewart Parnell, or can we let Finn do it?
So I invited Finn Dwyer to fill in the blanks, and he graciously stepped in at the last moment on zero personal acquaintance to do the film's subject matter the justice that MGM failed at 88 years ago. So I have relatively little understanding of the current size of Parnell's legacy in the time since IVJ in the committee room. What do I know about Irish history off the top of my head? In 1170, our old friend Peter O'Toole, aka Eleanor of Aquitane's second husband, invades, followed by Elizabeth I being the bad guy, Oliver Cromwell being the bad guy, the potato famine killing 1 million under current estimates and causing the Kennedy family to move here. So we invited Finn on.
Potato famine.
Yeah. So it is my pleasure to welcome Finn Dwyer, the host of the Irish History Podcast.
Thanks very much for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us. A tiny bit about Finn. He is a historian, author, and podcaster. He was born in Castlecomer County in Kilkenny. Did I say all that right?
It's Castlecomer in County Kilkenny. Yeah.
You say it so much more nicely than I do. Oh my God. He now lives in Waterford City, Ireland. He earned a degree in archaeology and Greek and Roman civilization from University College Dublin, and a master's in archaeology in 2004. And he hosts the Irish History Podcast, and we're so happy to have him here to explain stuff to us, because my knowledge of Ireland starts and stops at commitments. I've seen that movie. So yeah, thank you.
One other thing, I also make a podcast on Irish American history called Transatlantic that maybe a lot of your listeners might be interested in, or some of your listeners might be interested in. But I make it with another historian, and we look at lots of different aspects of kind of how Irish people influenced America and how America influenced Ireland.
So, Finn, can you please give us a 360-second 360-degree rundown on who is Charles Stewart Parnell?
Yeah, so Charles Stewart Parnell is one of the most famous Irish politicians of the 19th century. He was born in 1846 during the Great Hunger, which is the famine which devastated Ireland in the late 1840s. He, however, wouldn't have been directly impacted by it. He was the son of a Wicklow landlord. His mother was actually American. He grew up relatively average, normal life for his class, which were like the elite ruling class of Ireland at the time. The family had a lot of financial trouble that wasn't uncommon among landlords at the time. Parnell himself doesn't really distinguish himself in any real way until the 1870s. By this point, he's inherited his father's estate, and he decides he'd run for Parliament in 1875. He takes an unusual approach to this. He runs for what's the Irish nationalist Home Rule movement, who want they don't want independence from the British Empire. They want more autonomy for Ireland at this point. He runs, gets elected. Initially, he's not a particularly impressive politician. He makes a series of speeches that are pretty disastrous. But over the course of the late 1870s, he becomes this major figure in Irish politics. He improves his public speaking and takes a lot of hard, uncompromising stances in Westminster. So Irish politicians go to London at this point, and that's where Ireland is ruled directly from London. And in London, he takes a lot of kind of hard, as I say, uncompromising positions in relation to Irish politics. It's often said, he's not in London to win friends, which is not what most Irish politicians of the day do. They go over there, and I suppose they get, for want of a better term, trapped by the system. But Parnell, by the late 1870s, has kind of moved into a relatively radical position in terms of certainly parliamentary politics. He's supportive of tenants' rights, even though he's a landlord. His family are known as what's called, quote-unquote, good landlords in Ireland. So he supports tenants' rights. Around this time, something called the Land War breaks out in Ireland. It's a pretty violent struggle for increased tenants' rights. Parnell backs the tenants in this. He actually gets imprisoned in that conflict. And this really makes him into the national figure he becomes. In 1882, then, he kind of becomes the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party. They're the Irish politicians who want kind of home rule for Ireland in Westminster. And he forges the first real modern political party. So that's why he becomes very famous for that. They become really disciplined, which will become, and something that becomes very important in terms of his story. I'm sure it's covered in the film, and I'll cover it in a minute, but he kind of insists on this discipline that no individual is bigger than the cause. He goes from strength to strength. He's very, very good at, he's a very modern politician. He manufactures a persona for himself. Publicly anyway, he's a single man and kind of plays on this idea that he's married to the cause. And I suppose what you could call the height of his career comes in 1887, when he's accused of being involved in these murders that had taken place in Ireland in 1882, called the Phoenix Park murders, particularly a brutal crime that happened in Dublin, where two leading British politicians are killed by a secret society. Parnell had no involvement in it. There's a kind of a series of forged letters. These are revealed to be forgeries in a very high-profile case, and this is in 1887. He becomes, I suppose, his reputation is cemented at this point. However, as all this is going on, like any good politician, Charles Stewart Parnell had what you could call something of a double life. In 1881, he had met a woman called Catherine O'Shea, who was the wife of Captain O'Shea, who is also a member of this kind of home rule movement. He would become an elected politician for them. They're separated by this point in 1881, but they have a very amicable separation. She still kind of helps him out a lot. But anyway, after meeting, Parnell starts a relationship with Catherine O'Shea. Now, contrary to what a lot of was written about this subsequently, it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was common knowledge. The person on the street in Ireland didn't know that this was going on, but everyone who knew Parnell closely would have known he had this relationship with Catherine O'Shea. Through the 1880s, they actually live a kind of a domestic life together. They set up home together. Her husband obviously knows, but they're separated. Initially, he kind of doesn't like this, but he comes to terms with it. He goes along with it, essentially. And it's quite important, though, for Parnell that this is kept secret. Now, the whole thing comes crashing down in really spectacular form in the end of the 1880s, when Captain O'Shea moves to divorce Catherine, even though they've been separated for a decade at this point. He moves to divorce her. And to get the divorce, he has to cite a reason. And the reason he cites is the affair with Charles Stewart Parnell. Not fully understood why he decides to do this at this moment, but the scandal from this is pretty spectacular. It's, like he's contravened the great Victorian rule. You can do whatever you want, just don't get caught. He's getting caught in really spectacular fashion. He had been an expert in using the influence of Irish politicians in London because of this narrow balance of power between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. He had used this actually very effectively, but the Liberals, who had kind of allied with the Irish politicians, don't want anything to do with them at this point. And slowly but surely he kind of loses his allies. And then the Irish Parliamentary Party, this organisation, the first modern party really that he had formed, splits over this issue. Parnell breaks his own rule of being putting himself before the cause, refuses to stand down as a lot of people wanted. Eventually, the great opinion shaper of Irish society in the 19th century, the Catholic Church, they will eventually also turn on him. I don't know if I've said Parnell himself was a Protestant, but any politician, particularly within the nationalist movement, would need the backing of the Catholic Church, and he did have this for quite a long time. They eventually move against him. The parliamentary party splits. You end up with this awful situation where two nationalist candidates are running against each other in by-elections in Ireland. Parnell fights a by-election in Kilkenny, actually where I'm from, in 1891, and he was actually attacked and almost blinded in the town where I grew up in, Castlecomer. Late in that year, he actually gets very sick and then dies in the declining months of 1891. He had actually married Catherine O'Shea by this point because the divorce had gone through. But he's a man who's remembered as having achieved an awful lot in Ireland on several fronts. So he had played a very prominent role in the land war, which I've mentioned. He'd actually become the president of the Land League, the tenants' organisation, even though he himself was a landlord. He had furthered the cause of Irish Home Rule and this kind of demand for increased autonomy for Ireland, where you'd have a parliament in Ireland that would rule on Irish affairs, even though Ireland would remain within the British Empire. So he'd further that cause. He'd even got a Home Rule bill brought to the British Parliament in 1886. It had been defeated, but to get it there was a big achievement. And then the end of his life is embroiled in this colossal scandal. But one, obviously to a certain degree is one of his own making, but because of the way he had pitched himself as this man who had given everything to Ireland, he was a single man who, I interviewed a historian called Lloyd Maeve Houston, and they argue he had this very kind of sexualized imagery for the time, or image for the time, and this obviously ran headlong into this idea that all the time then he'd been having an affair. The dispute and the fallout of the affair is really personalized, really bitter, and he dies a very controversial man. Today he's remembered pretty favourably. He was called at the time the uncrowned King of Ireland, kind of a reflection of his popularity. He's not the only person to gain that title. Generation before, Daniel O'Connell had a similar title as well. But Parnell is the most well-known, successful Irish politician of the late 19th century. So post-famine, leading up to the revolutionary era, he stands as like one of the major figures in that. So yeah, like a towering figure, one embroiled though in a very modern, for want of a better term, sex scandal, and also wrapped up in Victorian morality, where he had really broken the iron law of the Victorian world, and that he got caught like in a huge scandal, and the fact that he was named in a divorce case was highly embarrassing.
Yes. Wow. So you said that he's Protestant and he's landed. So what is going on that makes him care or see himself as Irish?
Well, just because he's a Protestant and a landlord wouldn't mean that he's not Irish. There's a whole his family have been living in Ireland for generations and generations and generations by this point. About 20% of the Irish population are Protestant as well. So I suppose it's important to get that distinction out there. What makes he belongs, I suppose his identity could be described as Anglo-Irish, where a lot of the people from his social background would, they would see themselves as Irish, be very proud of their Irishness, but also politically identify with Britain and part of the British Empire. Now those identities can seem almost impossible to understand. In the modern context, it wasn't very controversial at the time. It was a contested idea of what, it's like any country in the world today has a contested idea of their national identity. And Ireland in the 19th and early 20th century was no different. There was competing ideas of what it meant I suppose, the Republican movement in Ireland, which would go on to lead the revolution. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but maybe it helps understand or flesh out this picture. They would have always argued that the people of Ireland, of any faith, should unify to resolve Ireland's problems. So Parnell, in that, I suppose the bigger question is what makes him the advocate of tenants' rights, and also what makes him an advocate of home rule. Because for many Protestants, home rule, they had a phrase that said home rule will be Rome rule, in that home rule would give Catholics a complete domination over Irish politics because they were about 80% of the population. And historians debate this. His family did have a tradition of kind of being on the liberal end of politics, being more sympathetic to, I suppose, mild or moderate nationalism. That said, his grandfather was opposed to Catholic emancipation. There's not a clear, there wasn't a road to Damascus experience in his life that dramatically changed him. He did come to politics quite late. He was about 30 when he stood for election, which it's not terribly late, but it's later for that time period. People often enter politics in their 20s. Surprised many people at the time. And certainly his emergence as an Irish political leader by the time he's 40 surprised a lot of people who knew him. And he does turn himself, I think you kind of alluded to it there, he is a bit of a class traitor in some respects, or presents himself as such. He allies, for example, to the Fenian Brotherhood in a kind of an indirect way, which is a very controversial thing for a landlord to do at the time. He also was a very modern politician in the way he used Parliament. He went to Parliament to use it as a platform in many ways rather than get in with the club.
In the movie Parnell, Clark Gable speaks in the same accent that he uses in all his films, which is to say, an American one with a little bit of that, like, 1930s, I've had an encounter with an elocution teacher somewhere in here accent. What would Parnell and Catherine O'Shea have actually sounded like in speaking, and what would they have been like personally if you happened to meet them socially?
Parnell, like most people of his class, was educated in England. That would have he would have had a cut glass accent. Well, I don't know if he would have. It's very hard to say exactly what he spoke like. He would have had a posh accent. In terms of his demeanor, Parnell was known, or very well known, for being an extremely aloof person. And it was actually part of his political image that he was this aloof, removed person. He wasn't a guy who was in the bar after a meeting knocking back pints with everyone. He wasn't a man of the people in that regard, but it was something he used to his advantage of being kind of removed from the fray almost. And again, this kind of fed into his downfall because he had cast this image of himself, and then it reveals that he's a very normal guy doing very normal things. It's like any politician who gets embroiled in this. If you carve out this image of yourself and then the reality is not that, whatever the reality is, if it's not that, that's a problem. He wasn't a very good speaker, should be said, but some Irish politicians of the 18th, 19th, 20th century, there's lots of famous speeches, books written about Irish political speeches. Parnell doesn't really fit in that mold. He doesn't have, there's not great collections of his speeches. He makes a couple of memorable speeches. He made one during the Land War that's quite famous, but it's more famous for what was going on around the speech rather than what he said. So he wasn't the best of orators, didn't use flowery language, was very direct though, and that was effective in his time.
So in the opening scenes of this terrible movie, there is a giant parade to say goodbye to Parnell before he gets on the boat to Ireland and makes a speech. And then there is also a parade for him when he gets off the boat. Would that have happened?
Yeah, well, what I could say is that this was a time of popular politics.
Okay.
There was, like, Parnell had played a central role in the Land War, which had mobilized hundreds of thousands of people. Mass demonstrations have been central to this. Election campaigns involved huge numbers of people. Far more people than could vote would be involved in these campaigns. So the idea that he would have a huge mobilization around him, like, is very consistent with the time. This is a time where Irish people are becoming more and more and more involved in politics. and had been for most of the 19th century. So he's really tapping into a much older tradition of engaging people, getting them out. Elections are big, can often be very fraught affairs as well. But he himself had really engaged the public spectacle of politics.
We learned about the potato famine in school, but what is happening? You touched on this early, and thank you. What is happening in Ireland in the decades between the potato famine and Parnell coming to prominence?
I suppose if we take it back a generation to the end of the Great Hunger ends in the 1850s. There's no defining end moment. It depends on who you are and where you are when it ends. So if you're living in Dublin by the end of the 1840s, it's coming to an end. If you're living out in the West, it's mid to late 1850s. There's huge levels of deprivation that continue. Irish society then in the following decades does recover to a degree in the 1850s and 1860s. That said, there's huge migration, most of it across the Atlantic to the US, that continues right through into the early 20th century. The Irish population continually falls until for a century after the famine. The major issue of the day, though, is the issue of tenants' rights. Tenants, is particularly in the three southern provinces, have almost no rights at all. They can be evicted at will. They don't get compensated for any works they might carry out in their land. They've, as I say, very, very few rights. And there's a big drive to get tenants, various different rights in terms of their property. And then there is a drive in the longer term to actually get the land, to buy back the land, which British governments will eventually pass through major legislation in the late 19th and then early 20th century that allows tenants to buy the land back off, ironically enough, families like the Parnell family. But Irish society is still struggling in the aftermath of the Great Hunger. That's, I suppose, does right into the early 20th century. It's a time of rising political tension, rising nationalist / Republican movement. It's a time of, the Fenian Brotherhood had been founded in 1858, so you've got various different, very small, kind of abysmal attempt at an insurrection in 1867, but there's constant flare-ups of tension that boil over into violence in rural Ireland. That said, Ireland generally is a pretty peaceful place, but it's not it's politically volatile, might be a good way to put it. At the same time, there's lots of modernization. Train lines are spreading across the island. If you go to a city like Dublin, it is a city in decline, but it's still growing slowly. Belfast is, by the end of the 19th century, is one of the fastest growing industrial hubs anywhere in Northern Europe. So, Ireland is a place of contradictions, but I think, generally speaking, a place defined by emigration to the US, struggling in the aftermath of the Great Hunger, which had seen 25% of the population fall in the space of 10 years. So, yeah, it's a place on the way down rather than on the way up.
I have a question about legacy. As I mentioned, I'm very embedded in this one particular era of Irish politics. How would a Gerry Adams look at Charles Parnell's legacy, and how did it influence what was to come?
What would Gerry Adams think? Without speaking for Gerry Adams, but Gerry Adams would belong to a slightly different tradition. To Parnell. Arguably, actually, he is the person or embodies a kind of marrying of those two traditions. So Adams got involved in politics essentially through the Provisional IRA, or what became through the IRA that then went on to become the Provisional IRA. Parnell was very much constitutional politics, and that has been a tension in Irish society in the 19th and 20th century. What becomes the strategy towards the end of the Troubles, or halfway through the Troubles, with the ballot box in one hand and the Armalite in the other. So that's kind of the two wings being merged. So I suppose in many ways, someone like Gerry Adams probably would draw on Parnell, see himself probably as more radical. The legacy of a man like Parnell is enormous in terms, particularly in the early 20th century. He's very much seen as the kind of one of the architects of what would be considered constitutional nationalism, this idea that Ireland can win reforms from the British Empire through the Parliament in Westminster. This is the dominant force in Irish politics up until the First World War, up until 1916, when it then starts to be replaced by Sinn Féin and the Republican movement over the course of the war and then into the War of Independence. So Parnell would be one of the architects of that. Beyond that, his contribution to the formation of a political party is very important. This idea of a disciplined political party didn't really exist at the time. Political parties, as we understand them. So I think actually they would have been more disciplined than, say, the Democrats or the Republicans in the US. From what I understand of US politics. They also came up with a very novel idea at the time where they gave politicians a stipend, because at this time politicians weren't paid, which made it a rich man's game. But by giving politicians a stipend, it opened it up to more people. In terms of media, they were light years ahead of anyone else around them as well. They very carefully crafted an image of what they wanted, with Parnell being central to that. So I think in that his legacy is immense as well. Probably more moderate and conservative than a lot of people might think he is, though. He was a moderate person in a radical world. Maybe might be a way to put him, but he's not he was opposed, generally speaking, to the Fenians who wanted armed insurrection in Ireland. He did use the threat of them to advance his cause, but generally speaking, that wasn't his politics.
Thank you. So there is a love story in this movie that is going to be absolutely botched, because in 1937, we are 5 years into the Hays Code, which made it basically impossible for about 3 decades for movies to tell the truth about what happens between consenting adults. Can you tell me a little bit more about his love story with Catherine O'Shea, who I've read was never called Kitty except to insult her?
Yeah, the word kitty actually at the time was a word used for a sex worker as well. So it's very unlikely she would have wanted to be called. You would refer to someone as a kitty. Parnell, maybe we'll just take it back a little bit before this. Parnell actually had this, I don't actually know if they ever actually were in a relationship, but he certainly pursued an American heiress before in the 1870s, and she wasn't interested ultimately. And this was kind of built into his myth that, he was kind of like a man who had the great love of his life and lost the great love of his life. And then he just kind of committed himself to Ireland. Catherine O'Shea, he meets her in 1881, and she's an interesting figure in her own right. She's actually very involved in politics, and she's acting as kind of a go-between between Parnell and the British government at the time. But it seems that very quickly after they meet, they strike up, it's a genuine attraction between the two of them. They start a relationship very quickly. They actually have several children together, setting up home together in London in the 1880s. Like, the relationship is very genuine. After Catherine O'Shea's husband secures a divorce, Parnell will marry Catherine O'Shea. They were very much in love, but she always had to take in public at least, a back seat. Now, people who knew them knew very well what was going on between the two of them. Like, they lived together, they had children together. It's just for his public reputation, this was controversial, and it was particularly controversial because technically Catherine O'Shea was the wife of Captain O'Shea, and he would actually end up being a member of the Irish Parliamentary Party, so a politician in Parnell's group in Westminster. So, like, there's so layers to this in terms of deception and the way it can be portrayed. And when the divorce case breaks, his political enemies certainly painted in a really salacious way, but the idea that kind of Parnell is falling out a window, pulling up his trousers, it's almost presented in that way rather than them having this like today probably very uncontroversial relationship, but in the Victorian world highly controversial. And to a certain extent, he had built a rod to beat his own back by presenting himself as this guy who was almost superhuman in terms of he was able to cast aside all his personal desires and demands and invest them in Ireland.
So what is the current size and shape of Parnell's legacy in Ireland? Because in the 30s, he merited biopic treatment from MGM, but in 2025, I couldn't find a biography of him available in ebook form through either of the two largest library systems in the biggest city in America.
That surprises me, actually. Maybe a person of declining relevancy. You could argue that he becomes completely irrelevant after Irish independence in 1921, insofar as what he had wanted was reforms to Ireland's position within the British Empire. That debate is settled to a certain extent in 1921-22, when you get the foundation of the Free State and then partition with Northern Ireland. So, his politics don't really apply so much in the way that, the political leaders of the revolutionary era in the 1920s, a lot of their arguments still apply, or even the revolutionary era of the 1790s. You could argue their arguments are actually more relevant than Parnell's. He still is kind of a symbol, though, of Irish nationalism. And when I use nationalism, it is worth people bearing in mind Irish nationalism is quite different to nationalism in continental Europe or the US. It tends often to be more left-wing than right-wing. So just to clarify, and the same goes for the word Republican in Ireland. It means something very, very different than it does in the US. And if people are curious about that, it is worth something reading up. You cannot draw a line between the Republican movement in Ireland and the Republican movement in the US. Yeah, well, I was interviewing the Irish author Joseph O'Connor. He's one of Ireland's better known writers today, and he actually commented how Parnell would be someone who he had he's talking about a list of people who he would topics of, and that he kind of talked about how Parnell's a fascinating person who there hadn't been kind of a novel written about, and that he was kind of someone he hoped to one day maybe write a novel about. So when I went to school in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't come out of school without knowing who he was. You might know that much about him, depending on how much you paid attention. There's a statue of him on the main street in Dublin. There are numerous GAA clubs named after him. Most Irish towns and cities will have a Parnell street. So I don't know, that says a lot. He's not as relevant maybe as other people to modern Irish life, but is still a towering figure in Irish history, if that makes sense.
It does. It sounds like he needs the Alexander Hamilton treatment like we got 10 years ago in the US, where all of a sudden everyone was like, oh, he was important. And founding father treatment. Yeah,
he might. Well, if Joseph O'Connor writes a novel about him, that'll set him off. But compared to other Irish figures and other Irish eras, he's not as dramatic. And maybe the sex scandal aspect doesn't have as much heft maybe today as it did even 30 years ago.
Well, Finn, you've been incredibly generous with your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you again so much for agreeing to appear on our show. We will absolutely plug you in our show notes. But is there anything else that you would like to plug while you're here?
Well, there is that other podcast on Irish American history called Transatlantic, which is worth checking out. We actually did an episode recently on American heiresses in Ireland, who Parnell's mother was one. And if you want to check out the Irish History podcast, there's actually a full episode on Parnell and an interview with Dr. Lloyd Maeve Houston on the Parnell sex scandal and how it was presented at the time. It's a great conversation.
We will definitely link to that in particular in our notes, because I think that would be helpful to our listeners. Cool. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me on.
I can't believe I'm about to say this, but let's get back to talking about this horrible movie.
And thank you again, Finn.
Yeah. Finn, you're a dream. So this movie opens
on the MGM Lion following a 1930s exposition text and the cast list. And the rare scenes where Gable is charming and enjoyable to watch are the ones where they let him be Clark Gable with no concern for playing Parnell. Like the one around the middle when he is Scandal moving into the O'Shea house where he's supposed to be sick but doesn't look sick, where he's standing in the O'Shea family foyer playing with their cat who takes a shine to him.
Already bored. Parnell is in quotes when the title opens. That's an observation I made because this movie is so boring. I was very excited to see Billie Burke in the credits. The ageless Glinda from The Wizard of Oz. How old did I say she was in this? Something obscene.
She was born in 1880 something, and this came out in 1937. So The Wizard of Oz is a couple years after this. She was in her 50s when she was Glinda. That woman drank from the fountain of youth. She puts everything we've come up with since to shame.
She might be the devil. I don't know how else to justify how she remained. Like she's pristine throughout her entire life. And is pristine here. Playing Myrna Loy's sister.
She is playing Myrna Loy's older, unmarried sister, but the character she's playing is so girlish, we thought she might be a younger sister.
We open on a parade. There's a parade going through town. Everyone who is not in it is watching it. There's a nice shot of him framed up looking out into the crowd. And it's the last time I will say anything in this movie was interesting. It's that one shot. He's just not even trying.
No, he is phoning it in with a telegraph.
Yeah.
So Parnell has just been in America, and there is a big parade to send him back to Ireland. And yeah, Clark Gable is wearing a top hat and no beard. The top hats are all super shiny. We're seeing some high school level acting here.
And I would see that and raise you kidnapped by North Korea and forced to be in a movie with Kim Jong-un level acting.
You're right.
No one wants to be there.
It's snowing and the snow looks fake. We really don't have a sense of how much time is passing. And then there's another parade to welcome him back to Ireland, except that he's at the end of the trip. It's like he walks through the boat and then Ireland is on the other side. It's right. He walks from one deck of the boat to the other deck of the boat and Ireland is on the other side. And ocean liners never got that big.
I would say too, the weather is probably gives the second best performance in this movie. There is so much weather in this movie. There is snow, there is fog. It is just omnipresent and excessive how much weather happens in this film.
The weather is always bad in this movie. And I know that is an effective black and white film.
Yeah, but it's really there's so much of it happening all the time.
I guess maybe that is California's idea of life in the British Isles.
Probably. He's he's making these speeches and saying stuff, but he is it's so non-committal, so it kind of goes in one ear out the other. And we hear him mention home rule, which we obviously just talked about with Finn. I can give a warning from the future that this isn't gonna go well. The Irish independence movement is going to go on quite the ride. I just don't know what's happening anymore, except we're finding out how important Parnell is through a lot of dialogue.
About 50% of the dialogue in this film is exposition, quoting from history textbooks.
It's that, and it's also the dialogue is three things in this movie. So it's that it is gaslighting you, because people say things about what a riveting speech you just gave. And it's no, it wasn't. It wasn't. I am here and you are lying. People kind of explain to each other what just happened in the last scene. no one's like having conversations. They're all sort of like, this is just what happened, so I'm telling you what happened. Like everyone's kind of explaining the plot to each other all the time. And that is what constitutes dialogue in this movie.
Like, showing, not telling.
We're hearing about
Film 101, which I don't think you have yet. Like, has USC Film School even been established at this point?
I don't believe so.
How long was this? Like 2 hours or?
I'm still watching it somewhere. It's like 8 days long. And we see them come upon that Dorothea Lange photo from the 1930s of the sad woman holding her children. Of these people sitting by the side of the road looking very sad. And they've been evicted. This woman has been evicted with her family, and Parnell is the only one who can fix anything. He tells the landlord that he will pay it, but that doesn't work. And then they arrest Parnell, because why not? He sends these people to his house, which is not a good long-term strategy for, for managing a housing crisis.
And at some point in the crowd, we've been introduced to the villain of the film, Willie O'Shea, who refers to them as unwashed hooligans. So Parnell offers to pay the £8 of rent that she owes, but the landlord wants the land for grazing. And the cops show up. It's a one-time solution unless he's inventing a reality show called Is Your Family Pathetic Enough for Parnell to Give You a House? Which sounds cruel if slightly more sustainable.
I don't understand how we go from this woman being like, so that's the King of Ireland, and then someone being like, the uncrowned king, to him getting arrested. And we're 10 minutes into this movie. I hate it so much.
Yes, at this point, when she said, oh, he'll get his crown, I just burst out laughing.
He comes upon O'Shea again when he's in his jail that's nicer than my apartment.
Yes, well, he was sent to fancy jail, and a note from Julie Kavanaugh's book on Phoenix Park about Parnell's time in jail. His incarceration in Kilmainham had not been an ordeal. In fact, he described the experience as inexpressibly consoling. Spared any kind of responsibility, he had been given the best accommodation in the jail, a spacious room which, with its elegant furnishings, provided by the Ladies' Land League, could have been the cigar lounge of a gentleman's club in London's St. James. Coercion in cotton wool, one observer called it. Parnell knew when he arrived that he and his two fellow MPs had been let off lightly, telling Catherine that they had fully expected to be split up and housed in different jails, but instead were allowed to associate freely. They would congregate in Kilmainham's magnificent glass-roofed central hall, which had a long central table strewn with newspapers, magazines, books, game boards, and a pack of cards. Parnell often seen absorbed in a chess match, or outside in the courtyard playing handball with James O'Kelly. Another prisoner assigned to look after him served as butler cum barista. And Parnell described, he makes me a soda and lemon in the morning, and then gives me breakfast. At dinner, he takes care that I get all the nicest bits, and concocts the most perfect black coffee.
Again, nicer than my apartment, and someone to do all that stuff for you.
And your apartment is way nicer than my apartment.
I know that I'm turning this into a bitching about music cues in film podcast, but the music cues in this movie are obnoxious.
Oh,
it's the most on-the-nose content. Like, every time they're in Ireland, they're doing, oh, McTavish is dead, and his brother dead. When he's in London, they're playing London Bridge is Falling Down.
While he's in jail, there's a cheering crowd outside, and I don't understand how they can hear him, because they're at a distance. He's behind some bars in the building and he seems to be speaking in a normal speaking voice. I don't feel like they explain how he gets out of jail, but he's back in Parliament, and enter Myrna Loy as Catherine O'Shea. She is in a carriage wearing a fabulous muff, collar, and hat set. She says that Willie won't let her divorce him. She goes into Parliament where there are no female MPs. The only place women are is in the listening gallery. And we have our first sighting of Montague Love as Gladstone. And every actor except Gable goes along with the out-of-control facial hair.
They have a run-in here. And they're in love immediately. And she's saying, like, that was so exciting to listen to. And I'm like, that's a lie.
Because this parliamentary session is actually far less exciting than an actual PMQ's session of Parliament, which, the first time I saw a PMQ's the session, I was like, wow, this is actually much more lively than our own Congress, because the Prime Minister is there, the head of the opposition is there, and they're like questioning and hammering at each other. And I thought, like, we would never get George W. Bush or the current guy as of 2025 if we had a system where they had to be quick on their feet verbally in order to get ahead like this. And they used to have this wonderful acerbic teddy bear of a speaker named John Bercow, who I loved, and just like go watch some videos of him insulting members of Parliament when he finds them out of line, and tell me he's not adorable.
So Willie O'Shea is being set up as the villain of this film. And it's clear, and she's like enthralled by him for whatever reason, because she's acting, because the script said so, because this is all predicated on lies.
Yeah, so Willie is pimping his wife out to Parnell. She's heard him speak in the House of Commons, and they have some 19th century Irish stereotypes hype manning him.
So they're like immediately like very like infatuated with each other, and it doesn't pay off, because they're both.
I don't believe that love at first sight like this actually happens. It doesn't happen to people. It just doesn't.
Well, and just they're immediately like talking on a level, again, of explaining to each other. It's not character development. It's them kind of telling us what is going to happen. It's garbage. And neither of them are particularly committed. And she invites him to dinner. And we're back at the house, and the servants are freaking out because Parnell is coming to dinner. And we meet her dowager Aunt Ben.
And I have to give a little bit of cred to this actress who plays the dowager aunt. Is quite lively. Her scenes with Billie Burke, even though the script is still terrible, they're at least alive.
I would guess that Billie Burke's never turned in a dead-eyed performance in her day.
I would agree.
And it's another scene where, like, we're getting all of this, like, information, like, dumped on us about how Willie won't give her a divorce.
That they all already know.
Yeah, like, and stuff that we already know, too, because we saw it in the movie a couple minutes before.
It's as if everyone in this movie is so bored that they have amnesia, too.
Yes. And so Gable shows up for dinner, and whatever. Willie is pressuring Katie for money that he needs because his election costs more than he expected. I need money.
And just as we're watching this, when it gets to this point, like, the look on your face, Sarah, was priceless. Just the look of sheer disgust at how bored we were. The way that you were, like, incredulous at how bored we were.
It's just so much stuff for so little story.
And this, like, isn't something where it's so little story.
It's not, but yet, like, it all feels so nothing and stakeless because you don't care about any of these people because they don't care about themselves in this movie. On, like, the meta level, like, no one cares, and why should I? Like, none of the dialogue matters. It's just that people are talking at each other, and she plays the piano, and it's like, what?
Normally, in a piano scene, I would make note of, do we see the actor's hands moving on the keys?
We do enough. And then, like, they're having, like, another soul-bearing conversation while she's playing the piano, which is how we know that she's not really playing the piano. Just about, like, their feelings and their lives and how they're kind of in love with each other because reasons. And then someone delivers Parnell a copy of what is going to be in the newspaper the next day about how he killed someone, maybe.
Oh boy. So this is how we learn about Phoenix Park, which is actually a fascinating true crime story that we're not going to learn anything about here. Really, we get next to zero details on what actually went down. And we've heard nothing about the actual murders, and they happened in 1882. I think this movie started in 1880, so I have no idea where 2 years went, because it seems like he hops off the boat, meets her after making some speeches. So it looks like a couple weeks worth of action tops, but it's been 2 years.
I'm like giving this the lowest possible score on time because you have no idea how much time has gone by at any moment of this movie. And he's like super chill about being accused of murder, probably because Clark Gable doesn't care. He's just sort of like, I didn't actually kill anyone, so whatever you read in the paper about me tomorrow, it's not true. And she's like, oh, wonderful. You know, and just like the outrage of this. Like, I'm going to talk about Jerry Adams. I asked Finn a question about Jerry Adams, and I'm going to talk about Jerry Adams when I get to my what you should watch instead. Besides watching the paint dry in my apartment. And then there's going to be a commission on Parliament, kind of, where they're going to investigate. So it's like Benghazi, I guess.
So Gladstone wants to set up a commission and Parnell accepts. And again, every conversation is so expository and so wooden.
So like he's all excited to set up the commission. Who cares? And then he and Katie go walking in the fog, and it's so foggy. And they're just like all of a sudden like, we're in love.
Yeah, and they run into a Cockney potato seller, and at this point we are waiting for Strasbourg, like we're waiting for Godot. And I don't understand how two people accustomed to 19th century London are so clueless about dealing with fog. The problem was that she can't see her carriage because of the fog. And one of them says, I know that I'm in love with you. They kiss. And again, Sarah has this priceless look of incredulity at how bored she is. They say, we mustn't see each other again. And gee, I wish. There were some demonstrations, and Parnell tells off a guy who's making fiery speeches. And this was the likeliest candidate for baby Lee Strasberg, but we weren't sure.
We couldn't get a good beat on it, but this could have been him, maybe.
Well, once again, we're watching things on sketchy Russian sites.
Shockingly, Parnell isn't available to stream anywhere.
Parnell tells everyone to go home and not to light any fires until it's to celebrate home rule. And then we cut to Glinda the Good Witch and Aunt Ben. Glinda is passenger seat driving a card game. And they were like, will Parnell come to dinner? Won't he come to dinner? Ben is actually like very worldly wise, where she offers to pretend to have a twinge and get out of the way for the night. It's just like what they go through to skirt the Hays Code is... And because there's, like, later when he's living with it, there's, like, no, he just moves in with it. Sure, he moves in with her, but it's plausible that nothing could be happening. And we know in real life they had 3 children.
I love that she's like, I'll have a twinge so you two can sit in the parlor and chat 6 feet away from each other. And he shows up and he's supposed to be sick or something.
He never looks sick. He never seems at all ill until he's finally dying. So when men die of old movie disease, they don't become... It's not like Garbo or or Ally McGraw in Love Story, where they somehow magically become hotter when they're dying. It's just boring.
And here's your cat scene.
Yeah, he doesn't seem ill at all. Right, I got my cat scene.
Yeah, the cat's definitely dead, by the way, but so cute. We're hearing like some exposition about the trial, and why would we want to see that rather than just hear about it?
Trial's still being on, where we have no idea when it started or when it ended. And I did give it credit for taking care to call her Katie, not Kitty. And so Parnell says that the proof that he's innocent is that the murderer can't spell, because they supposedly found letters that he'd written, but it's full of misspellings. And the letters published by the newspaper were supposedly in his handwriting. And we meet a Mr. Pigott, who is supposed to have been behind these letters and the publishing of them.
This Phoenix Ghazi, or whatever you want to call it, Phoenix Gate. I know, like, it's a proud tradition in government to waste resources on bullshit, but, like, this is a terrible waste of resources, except for the part where the British are finding yet another way to persecute the Irish, which I think you can't put a price tag on that for the British.
Yeah. So Myrna Loy comes to the trial and calls him out. She has a piece of paper. And I noted here, like, Pigott, who has this enormous white beard, says he's 54. And, like, how are Pigott and Billie Burke both 54 here? But yeah, like, of course these notes are forgeries. As if the courtroom scene couldn't get any less exciting, it turns into a spelling bee, which is how they prove those were forgeries, by having Mr. Pigott spell things. And if
you want to make your movie more exciting, put in a low-stakes spelling bee.
Remember in Lincoln where they were just saying yes and no, and it was riveting?
Yes. And then Pigott, like, walks outside of the room that they're in and shoots himself.
Yeah, gun control, folks.
But also, it's kind of amazing how it's sort of like no big deal that someone just shot themselves outside of like a Parliament business room or whatever. So Parnell gets to go back to Parliament, big whatever. Parnell announces to his people that there will be home rule with all of the enthusiasm of someone ordering a salad. And then there's this very, very old man who is very, like, touched by all of this, and he is like, "We are going to have home rule." And it looks like he is hanging onto life by a thread of this promise of something that is not going to happen. And I'm like, dude, you're not gonna have this. So just let go. Let yourself die. It will go on without you for some time.
Yeah, it's hopeless, old man. At this point, Parnell is basically living with the O'Sheas. And Willie tries to blackmail him, but he wants a seat in a cabinet for this new parliament that hasn't even been formed, that we know isn't going to happen. And somehow Parnell is being a bad politician here, because he could always say sure and just bullshit him and then find an excuse after the fact.
He's a terrible politician, at least
really
according
is.
to this movie.
He's invited to dinner at the Gladstones. It doesn't make sense why he'd take Katie. They still have plausibility of not having sex under the Hays Code, because their 3 children are invisible and never mentioned. And we see a 19th century process server show up with papers. I love how this job hasn't changed.
I know. I find it delightful that process servers have been doing the same thing for centuries. I don't think that's a job that AI can take.
Oh my gosh, you're right. So Parnell has been named as a correspondent in this divorce, and Gladstone won't see him. He won't defend himself in the divorce because I guess he loves her, and she is standing at the window crying, and OMFG, I don't care.
He has now sacrificed home rule in Ireland so he can hold hands with this woman, as we see in this movie.
Watch.
And, like, he's in court again. And like all the dudes in this movie in the background, all of these like 50 kabillion old men, like they all look like cartoon ghosts from the Haunted Mansion ride. I don't know how they found all of these people who look like old-timey specters and then like doubled down and gave them like this wild hair that does like, it just makes it look like the people who ride in the carriage with you at the end of the ride and like dance around and are like spooky, scary ghosts.
So yeah, she wants to defend and get up in court and say, I'm a big hoe. And she's going to say that she and Willie conspired to make him fall in love with her. So she's going to perjure herself, and he's like, it's not going to happen. And she's like, Charles, I'm afraid. And it's so unclear to me. Did Gladstone make Parnell resign in universe? Because we know Finn said that there'd been a by-election that really did a number on his health. And Katie overhears people calling her a big hoe on the train. Parnell looks ill. And of course, they open the door on point. We have another kiss. Oh my God, this thing just goes on and on.
And I think old guy comes back and is like, I guess we're not going to have home rule. And I'm like, yeah, I told you that, sir.
Yeah. Maybe like focus on your personal life because you can't really count on politics to make you happy. I don't know if this is 100% fair to Gladstone. But we see someone calls her Kitty and it's an insult. Mm-hmm. And Parnell punches the name caller. And I am laughing at how bored we are. And it snows again because it is always snowing in this movie, or foggy. And yeah, old man is heartbroken. Parnell collapses even though he looks fine. But he's dying of old movie disease. Oh yeah, he has a bad heart. It's confirmed medically by the film doctors.
And he's laying there dying, and she's like trying to rally him.
And we're like, no, just fucking die already.
But also, he responds to her, it's no use, Katie, which is spoken like a true determined hero.
Yeah, and Myrna Loy cries for like the 7th time in this movie, or 17th, I don't know.
Throughout this, and here we are at like the last offense of this. Like where it's just like this movie is pissing on my leg and telling me it's raining. Like they're like talking about how they're this great love, and no, you've shown me nothing to give me that information. And you can't keep saying anything you want without backing it up with some sort of like expression of that tells me why. Like there's no passion between these two. He hates his life in this movie. Like Gable, and he imbues in this character a desire to die, the likes of which we don't see again until Better Off Dead. Even better, Harold and Maude. Like he wants to be dead so badly is all that I'm reading from
Well, yeah,
Clark
because he's behaving, he's playing dead the entire film.
Yeah, like he's like, I cannot wait to die. And that really reads. And, and just like all of this, like he's this great orator and leader. And I'm like, no, he's not.
We're not seeing that.
You've given me no information that proves this. And you can't just keep saying things.
As you said, as we were watching this and you proclaimed, that this movie is pissing on my leg and telling me it's raining. There was thunder and lightning outside as you said that, as if the Almighty were agreeing with you that this movie pissed on her leg.
Indeed.
And as he's dying, the parliamentarians who were calling him a shame and a big man-ho 5 minutes earlier come in and say, we're lost without you.
Too damn bad. He just keeps talking, and then finally he dies.
And we see the Guinness harp flag waving, and the end. Finally.
And everything was perfect in Ireland after that.
Yeah, that's, oh my God, it's over. It's finally over.
Awards talk. You uncovered one.
The closest to this movie getting an award was in 1937. It won a photoplay award for the best picture of the month of August. The only dialogue I liked in this was, "Then I suppose I'd better have my twinge," which Aunt Ben says about, and that was mostly in delivery, because that actress was pretty good. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
Yeah, we rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but especially tailored to issues specific to biopics. If you want more detail on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You will also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
I'll go first here.
Okay.
So for outward appearances, makeup, and hair, I gave it a 5. I appreciated the tons of facial hair, but a lot of it just looked like, on the woman, it just looked like the 1930s, and I know they didn't care as much about authenticity. Then it's just everything, and a lot of it is for gay. Like, if you're not gonna do the fake beard, just don't make the movie. If you're not going to even try, don't. For acting and casting, I gave it a 2. 1 point for Billie, which is for Billie Burke and Aunt Ben. And I was going to include the actor yelling, who we think might have been baby Lee Strasberg, but I actually think he falls in under the 2. And I don't want to put extra on for him because we think he might be Lee Strasberg. For passage of time, I gave it a 0. For costuming, I gave it a 6. There are some very nice things here from the MGM wardrobe department that were probably used before and subsequently reused on many 19th century films. For quality of the script, I gave it a 1, and I don't know why I did that. It should have had a 0. For accuracy, I gave it a 2. For storytelling, I gave it a 0. For production value, I gave it a 6. You do see the MGM machine at work here. It's just not as impressive as elsewhere, and it's not enough to carry us on. For production, direction, decision-making, I gave it a 0, and for Do We Care, I gave it a 0. I couldn't even bring myself to care about Billie Burke or Aunt Ben. It's just that they made me not. It was less excruciating when they were on screen. So that brings my final average to 2.2. And I'm using the by so that brings it to 1.2, which is lower than Tennessee Johnson and lower than The Conqueror. Because not only did this have it was boring. Yeah. So if this holds, this will be our lowest scoring film ever. Sarah?
So outward appearances, I gave them a 5. And also for that ton of hair they brought in. That's it. Acting and casting a 2, and no, they do not capture anything, and the acting is not good. Passage of time, I gave it a 1. Costuming, I gave it a 7. Agreed with you on the costume department was on fuego as always. Quality of the script, I gave it a 2, which seems really high. Accuracy, I gave it a 3. These people existed. Storytelling, I gave it a 2, which again seems very high. Production value, I gave it a 7. To your point in regards to the machine. Direction, decision making, 1. Do we care, 1? My total score came to a 3.0. I feel like I should, because of my costuming and production value.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I will say those things were on display in a way that they certainly were not in The Conqueror.
Okay.
So, yeah. A 3.0, which is way too nice. Don't watch this movie. It's so boring. I think I need to, because 3.0 seems way too high. If I use my buy, I'm down to a 2. Costumes.
So the average for this movie comes to 1.6. So Parnell, you have earned a second opinion. Second opinion is a feature that we blatantly stole from the How Did This Get Made podcast, where the prize for a movie that scores above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of Internet Movie Database reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of the film. So I could only find one 10-star review on IMDb, so I thought we would trade paragraph by paragraph. So this review, 10 stars out of 10, titled Gable is Great, written by G. Keith _1 on May 19th of 2017, with the spoilers, observations, opinions. So
we know, dude, it's the internet.
So why don't we read off paragraph by paragraph? So you can go first.
All I have to say before I start reading is, are you fucking kidding me? Okay. Gable is great. He is handsome, charming, and charismatic in his portrayal. The character was ill during much of the film. Slow heart rate. Bradycardia, it looked like. He kept fainting and falling down, and medical science could do so little. Heart artificial pacemakers were invented in 1899 and put into use since around 1950. Parnell could have used a pacemaker, but alas, that great invention was off in the unforeseeable future.
He continues. I'm going to have to stab myself to not laugh. Gable underplayed the part. As Parnell, he refused to fight certain fights because of the gentleman who he was. For Parnell, it wasn't worth his valuable time to set himself up for more public ridicule and opposition. That would have meant more strain. That would have meant more strain upon his weak heart, which he didn't need. He may also have had high blood pressure. But then we get to Edna Mae Oliver was a blonde here. Curly Jean Harlow. This time, Edna looked almost cute and adorable. Aunt Ben was almost nasty with the character of Billie Burke, constantly browbeating that pestering gnat.
Billie Burke was adorable here, and her usual flighty, flittery character with little more than sawdust in her cabeza. This was highly calculated. Who was better at this than she? Don't forget that she embarked upon her latent film career after an earlier successful stage career. This was done in order to pay off the expenses of her late husband, that wastrel Florenz Ziegfeld. Ziegfeld lost his fortune in the stock market crash of 1929 and passed away in 1932, broke. The Wizard of Oz was soon to become a memorable role for Billie Burke Ziegfeld. And where would we be without that famous pink-gowned, bubble-riding Good Witch of the North?
Myrna Loy was excellent. Her gowns were charming and beautiful. She portrayed platonic Katie, but in real life the character had 3 Parnell children while married to O'Shea. It was quite different seeing Loy with Gable instead of with William Powell in the in the Thin Man films. I do miss seeing the sweet little dog, however.
Remember that this film was postcode, ending mid-1934. Now, illegitimate children could not even be hinted at. An earlier Gable film shows him as a physician attending a girlfriend's surgery, but in the real story, the woman had a botched abortion trying to end the life of a baby. Okay. 3 people found this review helpful.
I can't even with this reviewer. They're almost as boring as the film. And
I'm sure this is a sweet person who just got the internet in their house.
Oh, you're right. This does sound like it, and they seem quite knowledgeable in a number of areas, and like they have quite a bit to impart. So, okay, other stuff that you should watch or read, or just spend time on instead of this movie.
Do not watch this movie. I cannot overstate that.
Don't watch this movie, people.
Yeah. So, I have a pretty narrow lane of Irish history that I know about, but it is one of the most interesting and tragic lanes, and that is the Troubles, which is a approximately 30-year period of sectarian violence in which Irish people in Northern Ireland were fighting to be one nation with the rest of Ireland and independent of the British. And it was essentially like a slow-rolling civil war filled with terrorism on both sides and a real lack of easy answers. And I cannot oversell the book Say Nothing by a man I call the Indiana Jones of fucked up history, Patrick Radden Keefe. I read this book about 2 years ago, and it took me at least 3 months to stop mentioning that I read this book in every conversation I had. And on top of that, FX did a really underappreciated miniseries based on the book, and it is fascinating, and the actors are amazing in it. There's also a great series from PBS called Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland that explores the experiences of everyday people during the Troubles that is also so fascinating, and it really showcases the complexity of being a human being in these impossible situations. And also Paul Greengrass's film Bloody Sunday. It's the first time I knew about Paul Greengrass as a filmmaker, and that movie blew me away. It's about 20 plus years old at this point, but it's something that you should absolutely see. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
So I would recommend YouTube videos called MPs Behaving Badly. If you just go in and what MPs means members of parliament, that's their abbreviation. Also, if you want to understand why Clark Gable was special and is still beloved, I would recommend that you watch his film It Happened One Night, or possibly Mutiny on the Bounty. My mother and I cannot help it. We will probably love Gone with the Wind until the day we die, but I get that it's problematic in 2025, which is why I'm telling you that if you've never experienced Gable, you should watch It Happened One Night or possibly Mutiny on the Bounty.
I mean, I'll recommend, if you want to see its magic too, Gone with the Wind. He is quite dreamy in that movie.
He is dashing in that movie.
Yeah. And yes, it is a problematic film.
Yes.
But he's wonderful.
Yeah. It's fortunate that it's probably never being remade because you cannot fix it.
No, there's no fixing that. So just a few closing notes here. Our podcast baby has matured, and we have launched a Patreon, simply an effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you, platform hosting, recording equipment, research. And occasionally we order a movie or a book off the internet rather than watching it on sketchy Russian web servers. And sometimes we even try and see movies in the theater together. Or we'll pay for transit so we can record in person together. For now, we are offering shout-outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd love to thank Brandon and Gates.
Thank you, Brandon and Gates.
Okay. So if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it all helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids for our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @BioPickAPodcastStory. So check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopickapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. Our theme music is by Ben Patch. The intro is his song Slater Cannonball, and the outro is Spring Breakers, and you can check him out on Spotify.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Walking Tall, where, Sarah, you got me back good for Parnell.
I did. But I think you secretly enjoyed the movie.
No.
It's going to be a fun one, I think. So yeah, do come back and see us again.
Good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Indeed. You're probably
Good night, Sarah.
Much more cynical after this. Good night, Rena.